The air in the cathedral smelled like lilies and lies. It's funny how people describe heartbreak as a sudden snap. For me, it wasn't a snap. It was a slow, agonizing erosion. It was the sound of 1,000 tiny stitches unraveling one by one until there was nothing left to hold the fabric of my life together. I stood in the third pew, my hands folded primly over my black clutch, watching the man I had loved for 7 years adjust his silver tie in the altar mirror. Marcus, he looked handsome. He always did. He had that golden boy glow that made people want to trust him, the kind of charisma that acted as a shield against any suspicion of his cruelty. For 7 years, I was the one who polished that shield. I was the one who stayed up until 3 a.m. typing his business reports. I was the one who held his head over the sink when he drank too much, whispering that he was a good man, a great man, a man who deserved the world. I gave him my world, and today he was using it as a footstool to reach someone else. The organ music swelled, a mournful, heavy sound that vibrated in my chest. Then the doors at the back of the church groaned open. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I could feel her presence. Sophia, my best friend, my sister in every way but blood. We had shared secrets, clothes, and tears since we were 6 years old. She knew that I had already bought my own wedding dress, a simple silk slip tucked away in the back of my closet, waiting for the proposal Marcus promised was just around the corner. She wasn't wearing a silk slip. She was wearing a Vera Wang gown that probably cost more than my car. As she floated down the aisle, the silk whispering against the stone floor, she didn't look guilty. She looked triumphant. When she passed my pew, she didn't look at me. But she paused, just for a fraction of a second, her perfume, that cloying, expensive jasmine, filling my lungs until I thought I might choke. "I'm sorry, Christy," she had whispered to me 2 weeks ago when I found the invitation in my mailbox. "But some fires just burn hotter than others. You were his hearth, but I'm his storm. He needs the storm to feel alive." I had stayed quiet then. I stayed quiet now. I watched them exchange vows. I watched Marcus take her hand, the same hand that had held mine during my father's funeral, and slide a diamond onto her finger that was large enough to be a weapon. I felt the gaze of the guests on the back of my neck. They were waiting for it. They wanted the scene. They wanted the jilted woman to stand up and scream, to throw a vase, to beg him to choose her. But I didn't give it to them. I felt something strange beginning to stir in the base of my spine. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even anger yet. It was a cold, dense weight. It felt like mercury moving through my veins, heavy, silver, and toxic. My vision blurred for a moment, the edges of the stained glass windows glowing with a terrifying ultraviolet intensity. The heartbeat of the person sitting next to me, a total stranger, suddenly sounded like a drum in my ear. Thump, 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 thump. "Focus, Christy," I told myself, clutching my bag so hard my knuckles turned white. "Don't break. Not here." "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the priest said. The applause was deafening. Marcus leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a chaste wedding peck. It was possessive. Deep. He was marking his territory. I stood up before they could walk back down the aisle. I didn't run. I walked out with my head held high, my heels clicking a steady, rhythmic beat against the marble. Outside, the city was gray. Rain was threatening to fall, the clouds hanging low and bloated over the skyscrapers. I walked toward the parking lot, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps now that I was away from the prying eyes of the congregation. "Christy." I froze. I knew that voice. I turned slowly. It was Marcus's brother, Julian. He looked at me with pity, and that, more than the betrayal itself, almost broke me. "Christy, you shouldn't have come," he said softly. "Why did you put yourself through that?" "Because I needed to see it," I said, and I was shocked by how steady my voice sounded. It sounded like someone else's, someone older, someone harder. "I needed to see exactly what 7 years of loyalty buys you in this world." "Marcus is a fool," Julian muttered. "He thinks he's stepping up in the world by marrying into Sophia's family connections. He has no idea what he's lost." "He lost a shadow, Julian," I said, looking up at the darkening sky. "That's all I ever was to him, a shadow that kept him warm." I turned away from him and headed toward my beat-up sedan. But as I reached for the door handle, a black SUV pulled up, blocking my path. The windows were tinted so darkly they looked like voids in the air. The back window rolled down just an inch. I couldn't see the man inside, but I felt him. The air around the car didn't just feel cold, it felt charged. Static electricity leapt from the metal of my car to my fingertips. The mercury feeling in my blood surged, a low growl echoing in the back of my mind that didn't feel like it belonged to me. Christy Evans. The voice was like velvet dragged over gravel. It was deep, resonant, and carried a weight of authority that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Who are you?" I asked, stepping back. "Someone who knows that the dress you're wearing is far too small for the woman you're becoming," the voice replied. The window rolled up and the SUV hissed as it drove away, leaving me standing in the rain that had finally begun to fall. I drove home in a daze. Home. It wasn't home anymore. It was the apartment I had shared with Marcus. His gym bag was still in the hallway. His favorite coffee mug was in the sink. I walked to the kitchen, picked up the mug, a stupid thing with a World's Best Boss logo, and held it over the tile floor. I let it go. It shattered. I felt a tiny spark of heat in my chest. I went to the bedroom and opened the closet. There it was, my wedding dress, the silk slip. I pulled it out and looked at it. It looked pathetic. It looked like a shroud for a girl who didn't exist anymore. I didn't cry. My eyes felt like desert sand. I spent the next 3 hours packing. I didn't take much, just my clothes, my books, and the few things that were truly mine. I left everything Marcus had ever bought me. The jewelry, the expensive coats, the electronics. I didn't want the scent of his guilt on me. As I was taping the last box, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sophia. "I know you're hurt, but please don't be bitter. We can't help who we love, Christy. I'll always be here for you when you're ready to talk." I stared at the screen. The mercury in my veins began to boil. My grip tightened on the phone. Crack. The screen spider-webbed under my thumb. I wasn't even pressing that hard. Or was I? I looked at my hand. My nails looked longer, sharper, though I knew I hadn't been to the salon. My skin felt tight, as if I were outgrowing it. I threw the phone into the trash can. I lugged my boxes down to the car in the pouring rain. By the time I was finished, I was soaked to the bone, my black dress clinging to me like a second skin. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the apartment building. I was 26 years old. I had no partner, no best friend, and no plan. I had spent my entire adult life being a supporting character in Marcus's story. I started the engine. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay here. The city felt different tonight. The lights seemed brighter, the smells more intense. I could smell the rain hitting the asphalt, the grease from the diner 3 blocks away, the exhaust of 100 cars. It was overwhelming. I pulled out of the parking lot and drove toward the edge of the city, toward the industrial district, where the rent was cheap and the people were invisible. I didn't notice the black SUV following me from 3 cars back. I didn't notice the way the stray dogs on the sidewalk stopped barking and tucked their tails between their legs as I drove past. I only knew one thing. The Christy who walked into that church this morning was dead. And whoever was sitting in this car now, she was hungry. Not for food, for something else. Something that felt like justice. Something that felt like blood. I pulled up to a red light and looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My eyes, usually a dull, flat brown, caught the reflection of a neon sign. For a split second, they didn't look brown at all. They glowed with a fierce, molten gold. I blinked, and the gold was gone. "Just the light," I whispered to the empty car. But deep down, in that place where the mercury was still boiling, I knew it wasn't the light. The storm hadn't arrived with Sophia. The storm was currently sitting in the driver's seat of a 2018 Toyota, and it was just beginning to gather its strength. The industrial district of the city was where the architecture of hope went to die. Rust-streaked warehouses stood like hollowed-out rib cages against the skyline, and the streetlights flickered with a dying, rhythmic buzz. It was a place of shadows, grease, and secrets, perfect for a woman who felt like she was evaporating from her own life. I pulled the car into the gravel lot of a motel that looked like it hadn't seen a renovation since the Cold War. The sign, a flickering neon flamingo, buzzed so loudly I could feel it in my molars. I stepped out of the car. The rain now a steady cold drizzle that soaked through my thin silk blouse. I didn't care. In fact, I felt strangely warm. As I hauled my heaviest box toward the motel office, my foot slipped on a patch of oil-slicked puddle. I expected to go down, to feel the sharp sting of gravel on my knees, the final indignity of a day that had already stripped me bare. But I didn't fall. Instead, my body reacted with a speed that defied physics. My muscles coiled like high-tension wires, and I caught myself with a grace I had never possessed. I landed in a crouch, my fingers digging into the wet asphalt. I felt the grit under my nails, but more than that, I felt the power of the impact. I didn't just stay upright, I felt like I could have punched a hole through the ground if I'd wanted to. "Easy there," a voice rumbled. I bolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs, not with fear, but with a sudden, violent surge of adrenaline. He was standing by the shadows of the motel's vending machine. It was the man from the SUV. Up close, he was even more imposing. He wore a charcoal gray suit that fit him with surgical precision, the fabric screaming "old money" in a place that smelled of old cigarettes. His hair was dark, his jawline sharp enough to draw blood, but it was his eyes that stopped my breath. They were a piercing, predatory blue, the color of a glacier just before it breaks. "You're following me," I said. It wasn't a question. I didn't back away. For the first time in my life, the urge to flee was replaced by an urge to confront. "I'm monitoring an asset," he replied. His voice had that same gravel and velvet quality. And right now, that asset is leaking energy like a broken reactor. "I don't know who you are, and I don't care about your assets," I snapped, turning toward the office. "I've had the worst day of my life. If you're looking to mug someone, pick a person who actually has something left to lose." I felt his movement before I heard it. A blur of gray, and suddenly he was standing in front of the door, blocking my path. He didn't touch me, but the heat radiating off him was like standing next to a furnace. "My name is Damien," he said softly. "And you have everything to lose, Christy. You just don't realize that the everything you lost this morning was the anchor keeping you from floating into a very dangerous sky." "Move," I whispered. My vision began to swim again. That ultraviolet glow returned, fringing the edges of his silhouette. The sound of the rain hitting the pavement became a roar. I could hear the blood rushing through his veins, a steady, powerful rhythm that made my own pulse race in sympathy. "You're hungry," he noted, his eyes narrowing. "But not for bread. You're shifting, Christy." The betrayal triggered the catalyst. Marcus wasn't just your boyfriend, he was the dampener. Your subconscious chose him because he was mundane. He was safe. He was the cage you built for yourself so you wouldn't have to face what's currently screaming inside your DNA. "You're insane," I said, but my voice trembled. Not because I thought he was wrong, but because deep down, the word shifting resonated like a bell in a silent room. I tried to push past him. My hand landed on his chest, intending to shove him aside. The moment my palm made contact with the fabric of his suit, a shock of pure, unadulterated electricity slammed into me. It wasn't painful. It was a homecoming. I gasped, my knees buckling. He caught me by the elbows, his grip like iron. "Careful," he warned, his voice dropping an octave. "Your scent is changing. Every predator within 5 miles can smell the new blood on you. You're a beacon, and this district is governed by people who don't like untagged variables." "Let go of me," I breathed, but I didn't pull away. The heat from his hands was the only thing keeping me grounded. "Not until you look at me, not with your human eyes. With the other ones." I looked up. I couldn't help it. The anger, the grief, the humiliation of seeing Sophia in that white dress, it all gathered in my throat and came out as a sound I didn't recognize. It wasn't a scream. It was a low, vibrating snarl. My vision snapped into high definition. I could see the individual pores on his skin, the slight silver flecks in his blue eyes, the way his pupils dilated as he looked at me. The world became a map of scents and sounds. I could smell the leather of his holster, the expensive sandalwood of his cologne, and something deeper, the scent of a forest after a fire. "There she is," Damien whispered. He looked impressed. Not fearful, not disgusted. He looked like a man who had finally found the missing piece of a very old puzzle. "What am I?" I whispered, my voice cracking. "You're a Lycan, Christy. A pureblood. One that's been suppressed for generations. In my world, the world beneath the one you see, you are royalty. But in Marcus's world, you were just a girl who was easy to hurt." He let go of my arms and stepped back, giving me space. The sudden absence of his touch felt like a physical wound. "He's at his reception right now," Damien said, glancing at a gold watch on his wrist. They're cutting the cake. Sophia is laughing. Marcus is toasted on champagne, feeling like the king of the world because he thinks he broke you. A fresh wave of rage crested over me. It was different this time. It was cold and calculated. Why are you telling me this? I asked. What do you want? I run the city, Christie, not the mayors, not the police chiefs. Me. My organization handles the things that go bump in the night and the things that make the economy move. I've been looking for you for 3 years. I knew your lineage, but I couldn't touch you while you were human. The laws of my kind are strict. But Marcus did me a favor. He discarded the most powerful weapon in this zip code. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a heavy, black embossed card. Don't want your loyalty, he said, holding the card out. You've given that away for free for too long. I want a partner, someone who knows what it's like to be at the bottom, so they'll know how to stay at the top. I looked at the card. It just had an address and a single symbol. A stylized wolf's head entwined with a crown. Go to the motel, Damien said. Sleep, if you can. Your body is going to hurt tomorrow. It's the sound of your bones deciding they want to be stronger. When you're tired of being the victim in someone else's story, come to that address. He turned to leave, but stopped. And Christie? Yeah? Don't worry about the phone you broke. You don't need to talk to anyone from your old life ever again. They wouldn't understand the language you're about to start speaking anyway. He disappeared into the rain, the black SUV pulling out of the shadows like a ghost. I stood in the parking lot for a long time, the rain washing the salt of my tears away. I looked down at my hands. They were steady, no more shaking. I picked up my box and walked to the motel office. The clerk, a man with skin like parchment, looked up and started to say something about the price, but he stopped the moment our eyes met. He turned pale, his hands trembling as he handed me the key to room 104. Is there a problem? I asked. No, ma'am, he stuttered. No problem at all. Enjoy your stay. I went to my room. It smelled of lemon bleach and despair. I didn't unpack. I walked straight to the bathroom and turned on the light. I stripped off the black dress. The fabric was ruined, stained with rain and oil. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror. I looked the same, and yet I was a stranger. There was a glow to my skin that hadn't been there this morning. My collarbones looked sharper. My posture was different, upright, aggressive. I thought about Marcus. I thought about the way he used to pat my head and tell me I was so sweet for taking care of him. I thought about Sophia and her hotter fire. A laugh bubbled up in my chest. It wasn't a manic laugh. It was dark. They thought they had left me with nothing. They thought they had stripped me of my future. But as I lay down on the thin motel mattress, feeling the mercury in my blood settle into a low, humming power, I realized they hadn't taken my future. They had just cleared the way for it. That night, I didn't dream of weddings. I dreamed of running through a forest that never ended. I dreamed of the moon, huge and silver, calling my name. And I dreamed of a man with blue eyes who didn't want my service, but my strength. When I woke up the next morning, the sun was hitting the grime on the window. I felt a sharp, stabbing pain in my jaw. I reached up and felt my teeth. They were sharper. I got out of bed and walked to the trash can where I dumped my ruined shoes. I didn't need them. I felt like I could walk across the city barefoot, and the concrete wouldn't dare hurt me. I picked up Damien's card from the nightstand. The Luna in shadows. That's what he had called me in my dream. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Marcus was waking up next to his new bride. He was probably thinking about his breakfast or his meetings or how he'd successfully managed to handle his ex. He had no idea that the girl he knew was gone, and the woman who replaced her was coming for everything he thought he owned. I dressed in the only clean thing I had left, a pair of dark jeans and a leather jacket I hadn't worn in years. I didn't put on makeup. I didn't do my hair. I just looked at the card, memorized the address, and walked out the door. The industrial district didn't look so scary in the daylight. It looked like a playground. I headed toward the address on the card. It was time to meet the king. It was time to find out what kind of queen a broken heart could create. The address on the black card led me away from the skeletal remains of the industrial district and toward the gilded heights. The part of the city where the buildings were made of tempered glass and the air felt expensive. Standing at the foot of the obsidian tower, I felt like a glitch in the system. I was a woman in a faded leather jacket and scuffed boots, standing before a monolith that served as the heartbeat of the city's secret pulse. The lobby was a cathedral of minimalism. White marble, silent elevators, and security guards who looked more like special forces than doormen. As I approached the desk, the guard didn't even ask for my name. He simply looked at the way I carried myself, the way I didn't flinch when his partner moved toward me and tapped a button on his console. "The king is expecting you, Miss Evans," he said. His voice was devoid of emotion, but his eyes stayed fixed on my throat. He could smell it too, the change. The elevator ride was a silent, vertical launch. My ears popped, and that mercury feeling in my blood began to vibrate, reacting to the altitude, or perhaps the proximity to him. When the doors slid open, I wasn't in an office. I was in a penthouse that looked like a fortress disguised as a sanctuary. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, overlooking the city that had tried to swallow me whole. Damien was standing at the edge of the glass, his back to me. He had shed his suit jacket, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and etched with strange shifting tattoos that seemed to move under his skin. "You're early," he said, not turning around. "The hunger must be getting worse." "It feels like I'm swallowing hot coals," I admitted, my voice rasping. "My skin feels too tight. My bones, they're clicking." "That's the architecture of your soul trying to renovate its house," Damien said, finally turning. He looked different today. More primal. The blue of his eyes had deepened into something stormy, and the air around him crackled with a static charge that made my hair stand on end. He walked toward me, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to shrink. I felt the urge to lung. "You're afraid," he noted, stopping just inches away. "I'm not afraid of you," I snapped. "I know. You're afraid of the version of you that doesn't need Marcus. You're afraid of the woman who doesn't have to be nice to survive." He reached out, his thumb grazing my jawline. "But nice is a luxury for the weak, Christy. You were born to be formidable." Suddenly the floor seemed to tilt. A sharp, blinding pain lanced through my spine, and I gasped, falling to my knees. It felt as though someone had taken a sledgehammer to my ribs, breaking them only to knit them back together in a different shape. "It's happening," Damien whispered, dropping to his knees beside me. "Don't fight it. If you fight it, the bone will splinter. Let the wolf lead. Give her the reins." "I can't." I choked out, my fingernails clawing at the expensive marble floor. I heard the sound of stone cracking. I was tearing the floor apart with my bare hands. "Yes, you can. Think of the altar, Christy. Think of the way Marcus looked at Sophia. Think of the way they laughed while you bled out emotionally in that pew. Use that rage as a bridge." The memory hit me like a physical blow. I saw Sophia's smug smile through the jasmine-scented air. I felt the cold vacuum of Marcus's indifference. The pain in my body merged with the pain in my heart, creating a supernova of white-hot agony. I screamed, but the sound that left my throat wasn't human. It was a rhythmic, bone-chilling howl that shattered a decorative crystal decanter on a nearby table. My spine elongated with a series of wet, sickening pops. My vision exploded into a kaleidoscope of heat signatures. I could see the heat radiating from the vents, the electrical hum of the wires in the walls, and most importantly, the pulsing golden warmth of the man in front of me. My senses didn't just sharpen, they transcended. I could smell the rain on the clouds 3 miles away. I could hear the heartbeat of a bird perched on the roof 50 stories above. And then the transition was complete. I was no longer a woman kneeling on a floor. I was something else. I was larger, heavier, and possessed of a lethality that felt as natural as breathing. I looked down at my paws, massive, silver-furred, and tipped with obsidian claws. I felt the power coiling in my haunches, a spring-loaded tension that could launch me across the room in a heartbeat. I looked at Damien. He didn't flinch. He reached out and placed a hand on my head, his fingers buried in my thick silver fur. "Magnificent," he breathed. "A silver lunar. I haven't seen your kind in 3 centuries. They said your bloodline was extinct, hunted down by those who feared a power they couldn't control." I let out a low rumble, a purr that sounded like an idling engine. The rage was still there, but it was no longer a chaotic storm. It was a weapon. I felt complete. For 26 years, I had been a puzzle with a missing piece. This was the piece. You feel it, don't you? Damien asked, his eyes locked onto mine. The clarity. The realization that Marcus didn't just betray you. He was holding back a goddess because he was too small to stand in her shadow. I nudged his hand, a silent command for more contact. You are just a Lycan, Christy. You are the alpha of a forgotten house. And in my world, that makes you my equal. My queen, if you choose to take the crown. He stood up, and I followed, my forepaws silent on the marble. I caught my reflection in the glass wall. I looked terrifying. A massive silver-white wolf with eyes like molten gold, radiating an aura of ancient, cold authority. Now, Damien said, his voice turning sharp and businesslike, the transformation is the easy part. The hard part is the world we live in. My rivals, the Mafia families who think they run the shipping docks and the political circuits, they are already sensing a shift in the power dynamic. They will come for you, thinking you are my weakness. He walked over to a desk and picked up a tablet, sliding a photo across the screen. It was Marcus and Sophia. They were at a luxury resort, Sophia wearing a bikini that cost more than my first month's rent, Marcus holding a drink and looking at his phone. They're using your disappearance to fuel a narrative, Damien said. Marcus told the press today that you were mentally unstable, that you fled because you couldn't handle his happiness. He's trying to ruin your reputation so you can never come back and claim your share of the assets you helped him build. A snarl ripped through my chest. The glass in the windows rattled. Good, Damien said, a dark smile touching his lips. Hold on to that. But we don't kill them yet. Death is too quick for a betrayal this deep. We are going to take everything they love. We are going to dismantle their world piece by piece until they are the ones begging for a shadow to hide in. He looked at me, his gaze intense. Can you change back? Focus on the girl who wanted to be a doctor before Marcus told her it was too much work. Focus on the woman who loved the smell of old books. Bring her back, but keep the wolf's heart. I closed my eyes. I thought of the girl I used to be. I felt the agonizing reverse. The shrinking of bone, the receding of fur, the return of human skin. It hurt just as much, but this time I knew what was waiting on the other side. When I opened my eyes, I was human again, shivering and naked on the marble floor. Without a word, Damien stripped off his silk shirt and wrapped it around me. It was warm and smelled of him. I want to learn, I said, my voice cracking but firm. I want to learn how to fight, how to run your business, how to make them bleed without ever touching them. I will teach you everything, Damien promised, helping me to my feet. But first, you need a new name. Christy Evans died in that church. I looked out at the city, the lights twinkling like fallen stars. I felt the wolf stirring beneath my skin, ready to leap out at a moment's notice. Call me Silver, I said. Silver, Damien repeated, nodding. The most conductive metal, perfect for someone who is about to shock the world. He led me to a bedroom suite that was larger than my entire old apartment. Rest, Silver. Tomorrow, your training begins. We have a gala to attend in 3 days. Marcus and Sophia will be there, celebrating their perfect union. It's time we introduce them to the woman they created. As he closed the door, I walked to the window. I didn't feel like the victim anymore. I felt like a predator. I looked at my reflection, human, pale, and seemingly fragile. I smiled, and for a second, my eyes flashed gold. They had no idea. They had brought a knife to a war they didn't even know had started. And I was the one holding the blade. The next 3 days were not a vacation. They were a systematic dismantling of every insecurity I had ever owned. Damien didn't just want me to be strong. He wanted me to be lethal in every language the world understood. That meant the language of violence, the language of finance, and most importantly, the language of silence. The most powerful person in the room is never the one talking, Damien told me on the second morning. We were in a private gym located in the bowels of the Obsidian Tower. He was teaching me how to channel the Lycan strength without fully shifting. The one talking is seeking validation. The one listening is seeking a weakness. I was dripping with sweat, my knuckles bruised from the heavy bag. But I didn't feel tired. The mercury in my veins had become a constant, low-level hum of electricity. My healing factor was so fast that the bruises I earned in the morning were gone by lunch. Again, he commanded. I lunged. This time, I didn't just punch. I moved with the predatory fluidity I'd discovered in my wolf form. I was a blur of motion. Before Damien could block, I had swept his leg and pinned him to the mat, my forearm pressed against his throat. For a heartbeat, the room went silent. I was hovering over him, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. I could smell the adrenaline on him, not fear but excitement. His eyes searched mine, looking for the girl who used to apologize for taking up space. She wasn't there. Good, he rasped, his hand coming up to grip my waist. He didn't push me off. You're learning to stop asking for permission to exist. I let him up, feeling a strange, magnetic pull toward him that had nothing to do with our shared nature. It was respect. It was the first time a man had ever looked at me and seen a peer rather than a project. The third day was for the Mafia makeover. If I was going to face Marcus and Sophia, I couldn't go as Christy Evans. I had to go as something they wouldn't recognize, something that would haunt their dreams. Damien brought in a team of people who didn't look like stylists. They looked like architects. They didn't talk about pretty. They talked about impact. The hair stays silver white, the lead stylist murmured, her eyes wide as she brushed through the tresses that had changed color during my first transformation. It wasn't the white of old age, it was the shimmering, metallic white of a moonlit forest. It's too rare to hide. They dressed me in a gown that felt like liquid midnight. It was a deep, ink-black silk that clung to my body like a second skin, featuring a back so low it ended just above the curve of my spine, displaying the subtle, shifting tattoo of the wolf's crown that had manifested on my skin. The slit in the skirt went up to my mid-thigh, revealing legs that were now corded with lean, powerful muscle. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the girl who spent her weekends coupon clipping for Marcus's grocery list. I saw a woman who could buy and sell the entire grocery chain without checking her bank balance. You look like a war wrapped in silk, Damien said, leaning against the doorframe. He was dressed in a black-on-black tuxedo, looking every bit the Lycan king. I feel like a ghost, I replied, touching my throat. Coming back to haunt the living. No, Damien corrected, walking over and placing a heavy, diamond-encrusted necklace around my neck. The stones were cold against my skin. Ghosts are memories. You are a reality they aren't prepared for. The Unity Gala was the event of the season. It was where the city's elite, both the legitimate and the shadow players, came to stroke each other's egos. Marcus and Sophia were the guests of honor. The story of their whirlwind romance and the tragic breakdown of Marcus's ex-fiancé had made them the talk of the town. As Damien's black SUV pulled up to the red carpet, I felt the wolf stir. My hearing spiked. I could hear the camera shutters clicking, the vapid chatter of the socialites, and the clinking of champagne flutes from inside the ballroom. "Ready?" Damien asked, offering his arm. "Ready," I said. As we stepped out, the flashes were blinding, but I didn't blink. I walked with my chin up, my movements slow and deliberate. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Whispers followed us like a trail of smoke. Who is she? Is that Damien Thorne's new partner? Look at that hair. Is it real? We entered the ballroom, a cavernous space of gold leaf and crystal. And there they were. Marcus was standing near the stage, a glass of bourbon in his hand, laughing at something a senator was saying. Sophia was draped over his arm, looking like a porcelain doll in a pink lace dress that screamed innocence. I felt the growl starting in my chest. Damien squeezed my hand, a silent reminder to keep the mask in place. We made our way through the crowd, heading straight for the happy couple. As we approached, Marcus turned, his practiced politician's smile firmly in place. "Damien, glad you could make." The words died in his throat. His glass tilted precariously in his hand. His eyes went wide, scanning my face, my hair, my body. He looked like he was seeing a dead woman walking. "Christy," he whispered, his voice cracking. Beside him, Sophia's face went from smug to ghostly pale. Her grip on Marcus's arm tightened so hard I could hear her silk gloves strain. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice smooth and cold as a frozen lake. "Do I know you?" The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush. The people around us leaned in, their eyes darting between the unstable ex and the woman standing before them. "Christy, stop playing," Marcus hissed, stepping forward. He tried to reach for my arm, his old habit of physical dominance kicking in. "What the hell is this? What did you do to your hair? And where did you get this?" He gestured vaguely at my dress and the millions of dollars in diamonds around my neck. Damien stepped in, his presence dropping the temperature of the room by 10 degrees. He didn't touch Marcus, but he didn't have to. The sheer weight of his alpha aura made Marcus stumble back a step. "Mr. Thorne," Marcus stammered, his bravado evaporating, "I didn't realize you were acquainted with my former assistant." Assistant. He couldn't even bring himself to say fiancé in front of Damien. "Former assistant?" Damien asked, his tone one of mild amusement. "That's a strange way to describe a woman of Silver's lineage. But then again, some men are notoriously bad at appraising true value." "Silver?" Sophia squeaked, her voice high and brittle. "Christy, you're making a fool of yourself. Come on, everyone knows you had a breakdown. Marcus told us you ran away because you couldn't handle the stress." I looked at Sophia. I didn't look at her with anger. I looked at her with pity. It was the ultimate insult. "Sophia," I said softly, "you look beautiful tonight. That pink really hides the way you're shaking." I leaned in closer until my lips were inches from her ear. I let a hint of the wolf's gold flash in my eyes, and I let out a sub-audible growl that only a Lycan, or someone being hunted by one, could feel. "I didn't run away, Sophia," I whispered. "I just realized that I was playing in a sandbox when I belonged in a throne room. Keep Marcus. He's exactly what you deserve. A man who only feels big when he's standing on someone else's neck." I pulled back, smiling brightly for the benefit of the surrounding cameras. "Now, if you'll excuse us," I said to the stunned crowd. "I believe the auction is about to start. And there are a few things Marcus owns that I've decided I want back." We walked away, leaving them standing in a vacuum of their own making. I could feel Marcus's eyes on my back, eyes full of a sudden, desperate longing that made me want to vomit. He didn't want the girl who loved him. He wanted the woman who didn't need him. "You handled that perfectly," Damien murmured as we reached the VIP lounge. "That was just the introduction," I said, watching Marcus across the room. He was trying to down his drink, but his hands were shaking so badly he spilled some on his white shirt. "Now comes the demolition." "What's the first move, Silver?" I looked at the stage where the auctioneer was announcing the first lot, a block of prime real estate in the shipping district, the very land Marcus needed for his expansion project. The project I had designed for him. "The move is simple," I said, my golden eyes fixed on my target. "We take his foundation, and then we watch him realize that without me, he's nothing but a suit with no one inside it." The hunt had officially begun. The auction block was the centerpiece of the gala, a stage where power was quantified in numbers and ego was the primary currency. The Shadow Docks project, a massive redevelopment plan for the city's waterfront, was the crown jewel of the evening. For 3 years I had been the silent architect of that project. I had stayed up until dawn drafting the zoning proposals, negotiating the back alley permits, and mapping out the logistics. Marcus had presented it as his magnum opus, the deal that would elevate him from a mid-tier developer to a titan of industry. He needed this win. His investors were already whispering that he was nothing more than a pretty face with a silver tongue. "Ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer's voice boomed. "Lot 42, the waterfront development rights. Starting bid, $50 million. I sat in the front row, Damien's presence a solid, grounding heat at my side. Across the aisle, Marcus sat with Sophia. He looked frantic, his eyes darting toward me every few seconds, his face flushed with a mixture of lust and panic. Sophia was clutching his arm so tightly her knuckles were white, her eyes fixed on my diamond necklace as if she were trying to set it on fire with her mind. "50 million, Marcus signaled, his voice a bit too loud. He tried to project confidence, but the sweat on his brow betrayed him. 60, a voice called from the back. A representative of the Moretti family, one of the 5 Mafia syndicates that kept the city in a chokehold. 70, Marcus countered immediately. He looked at me, a smug smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. He thought he was winning. He thought this was still his game. Damien leaned in, his lips brushing my ear. The Morettis are baiting him. They want to see how deep his pockets are before they cut his throat. Do you want to play, or do you want to end it? I want to see the moment the light goes out of his eyes, I whispered. 80 million, the Moretti representative shouted. Marcus hesitated. 80 million was his ceiling. He had leveraged everything, his cars, his penthouse, even the engagement ring he'd bought Sophia, to secure the credit for this bid. 80 million going once? The auctioneer called. Marcus took a deep breath, looking around the room for validation. He found none. The room was watching me. 90 million, Marcus yelled, his voice cracking. He looked at Sophia, who gave him a shaky thumbs up. He thought he had it. He thought he had reclaimed his throne. I didn't even look at the auctioneer. I looked at Marcus. I let the corner of my mouth curl into a slow, predatory smile. I raised my paddle with the grace of a queen sentencing a traitor. 150 million, I said. The room went deathly silent. Even the auctioneer froze, his gavel hovering in midair. 150 million wasn't a bid, it was an execution. Marcus's face went from flush to a sickly, ashen gray. You don't have that kind of money, he stammered, standing up. This is a joke. She's a disgruntled ex-employee trying to sabotage a legitimate business deal. Sit down, Marcus. Damien's voice cut through the air like a blade. He didn't raise his voice, but the authority behind it made the guards at the door shift their weight. The lady's credit is backed by the Thorne estate. Unless you have a counteroffer, I suggest you mind your manners. The auctioneer cleared his throat, sensing the shift in the room's gravitational pull. 150 million, going once, going twice, sold to the lady in the front row. The gavel slammed down. Marcus collapsed into his chair. He looked small. For the first time, I saw him for exactly what he was, a hollow man built out of other people's efforts. Sophia looked at him with a flash of something that wasn't love. It was calculation. She had married a king, but she was realizing she was tied to a bankrupt pretender. You should have stuck to the reports, Christie, Marcus hissed as we stood to leave the room. He had caught up to us in the foyer, his eyes bloodshot. You think Damien Thorne cares about you? You're a trophy, a way for him to spit in the face of the legitimate world. Once he's bored of you, you'll have nothing. I turned to him. I didn't see the man I had loved for 7 years. I saw a nuisance. Marcus, I said, stepping into his personal space. I could smell the cheap bourbon and the sour scent of failure on him. I didn't take this project because I wanted the money. I took it because it was mine. I designed every square inch of those docks while you were busy networking in Sophia's bed. You didn't just lose a project tonight. You lost the only person who ever made you look competent. I reached out and adjusted his silver tie, the one I had bought him for our 5th anniversary. By the way, I whispered, my voice dropping into that low, Lycan growl. Check your business accounts. The Morettis don't like it when people waste their time at auctions. I imagine they'll be looking for their consultation fee by midnight. I turned on my heel and walked away, the sound of my heels on the marble sounding like a funeral march for his career. He's going to go to the Morettis for help, Damien said as we walked toward the parking valet. He's desperate, and desperate men are the easiest tools for the Mafia to use against me. Let him, I said. He'll find out that being a tool usually involves being discarded. Suddenly, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. The mercury in my blood began to boil. My ears twitched, picking up the sound of a safety being clicked off a firearm behind a row of parked limousines. Get down! I lunged at Damien, my Lycan reflexes taking over before I could even think. We hit the pavement just as a volley of suppressed gunfire shattered the glass of the SUV behind us. The air was filled with the scent of ozone and cordite. Moretti's men, Damien growled, his hand already reaching for the holster under his tuxedo jacket. They're not waiting for Marcus. They're trying to destabilize the Alpha. 3 men in tactical gear emerged from the shadows, their movements fast and professional. But they were human. And I was something else. I didn't wait for Damien to give an order. I didn't wait for my own fear to catch up. I shifted. It wasn't a full transformation. There wasn't time. But I let the wolf take the lead. My fingernails elongated into jagged claws, my canine teeth sharpened, aching for the kill. My vision turned monochrome, the world slowing down as my brain processed the scene in fragments of milliseconds. I moved like a shadow. The first gunman didn't even see me coming. I was under his guard in a heartbeat, my hand catching his throat. I didn't use a weapon. I used the raw, unbridled strength of a Silver Lunar. With a single twist, he was down, his windpipe crushed. The second man turned, his rifle sweeping toward me. I didn't flinch. I felt the heat of a bullet graze my shoulder, but the pain was distant, secondary. I leaped, my legs propelling me 10 feet into the air. I landed on his shoulders, my claws sinking into his tactical vest. We went down together, and I didn't stop until he was no longer a threat. The third man hesitated. He looked at me. A woman in a torn silk gown, her eyes glowing like twin suns, blood dripping from her fingertips. He dropped his gun and ran. I started to pursue, a snarl ripping from my lungs, but Damien's hand caught my wrist. "Let him go," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We need a survivor to tell the Morettis what they're up against." I stood there, panting, the adrenaline humming in my ears. I looked down at my hands. They were stained red. My black gown was ruined, the silk torn at the shoulder where the bullet had grazed me. I felt the wound closing already, the skin knitting itself back together with an itchy, hot intensity. "You're bleeding," I whispered, looking at a graze on Damien's cheek. "I'll live," he said, his eyes fixed on me. There was a new look in them. It wasn't just respect anymore. It was awe. "You didn't hesitate." "They tried to take you," I said, the wolf's voice still vibrating in my throat. "No one takes what's mine." Damien smiled, a slow, dangerous expression. He reached out and wiped a smudge of blood from my cheek with his thumb. "Welcome to the family, Silver," he said. "The Morettis just declared war, and they have no idea that the most dangerous person on the battlefield is the woman they thought they could discard." As the sirens began to wail in the distance, we stepped into a secondary security vehicle that had pulled up. I looked back at the gala entrance. Marcus was standing under the portico, watching us. He had seen everything. He had seen me move with the speed of a demon. He had seen me protect the man who was now his greatest enemy. I didn't look away. I didn't hide. I leaned out the window and let him see my eyes. Gold, fierce, and entirely devoid of the love I had once wasted on him. I wasn't just the architect of the docks anymore. I was the architect of his nightmare. "Where to?" the driver asked. "Home," Damien said. "We have a war to plan, and I believe Silver has a few more things she wants to take from Marcus before we're through." I leaned back into the leather seat, the mercury finally cooling into a steady, lethal calm. The betrayal had been the spark. The transformation had been the fuel. But the fire? The fire was just getting started. The aftermath of the gala felt like the cooling of a forge. The city was still buzzing with the scandal of the auction, but inside the obsidian tower, the air was thick with the scent of war and old leather. I sat in the high-backed chair of the war room, staring at the digital monitors. My shoulder, where the bullet had grazed me, was completely healed, leaving nothing but a faint, silvery line that looked more like a mark of rank than a scar. I was wearing a structured velvet suit, sharp, dark, and impenetrable. "The Morettis are scrambling," Damien said, pacing the perimeter of the room. He had abandoned his tie, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. "You terrified them, Silver. They expected a hitman. They didn't expect a goddess of the hunt." "They'll be back," I said, my voice sounding more resonant, more grounded. "Fear is a temporary deterrent. Eventually it turns into a desperate kind of courage." "Which is why we strike first," Damien replied, stopping behind my chair. He placed his hands on my shoulders, and I felt that familiar surge of electric warmth. "But not with bullets. We strike their pockets. You've already taken the docks. Now I want you to take their supply lines." I looked up at him. "You're giving me the operation?" "I'm giving you the throne you were born for," he said. "The Lycan Council is meeting in 2 days. They've heard rumors of a Silver Lunar. They're skeptical. They think you're a myth I've fabricated to solidify my claim. You need to show them you're real." I felt the wolf stir, a low vibration in my chest. "How?" "By leading. By showing them that you can manage the shadows as well as the blood." That evening, I decided to walk. I needed to feel the city under my feet, not as a victim, but as a predator. I took a plain black sedan to the park near my old apartment, the place where Marcus had first told me he loved me. It was a sentimental weakness, perhaps, but I wanted to see if the ghost of my old self still lived there. The park was shrouded in a light fog, the street lamps casting long, amber fingers across the grass. I walked toward the stone bridge, my senses dialed to an 11. I could hear the city breathing. Christy? I didn't turn around. I had smelled him 3 minutes ago, the scent of expensive cologne mixed with the sour tang of anxiety and too much scotch. It's Silver now. Marcus, I said, my back to him. Christy is buried under the marble of the cathedral where you left her. He stepped out from behind a willow tree. He looked terrible. His suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his eyes were rimmed with red. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. I made a mistake, he whispered, his voice cracking. Sophia, she's not you. She's demanding, she's shallow, she's already talking about a divorce because the bank froze our joint accounts. I was confused, Christy. The pressure of the business, the expectations. I thought I needed someone with her connections, but I was wrong. It's always been you. He moved toward me, reaching out as if to touch my hair. I turned then, and the sheer coldness in my expression made him stop mid-stride. Always been me? I asked, a dry laugh escaping my lips. Was it me when you were picking out her engagement ring? Was it me when you stood at that altar and promised her the world? Or was it only always me when you realized I was the one holding the keys to the kingdom you just lost? No, it's not about the money, he lied, though his pupils dilated, a tell I could now read with terrifying accuracy. I saw you at the gala. You were magnetic. You've changed, Christy. You have this power now. We could be a power couple. With your new, whatever this is, and my reputation, we could rule this city. I stepped closer to him. He was taller than me, but I felt like I was looking down at an ant. You still don't get it, do you? I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. You think this power is something I put on like a dress. You think it's a tool for us. I let the wolf peek through. My eyes flared gold, and the air around us grew heavy, the temperature dropping until our breath hitched in the cold. I am a Silver Lunar, Marcus. I am the alpha of a bloodline that could tear your world apart with a thought. You didn't just lose a girlfriend. You lost a protector. You were only safe because I chose to stand in front of you. Marcus stumbled back, his heel catching on a tree root. He fell to the ground, staring up at me with pure, unadulterated terror. What are you? He breathed. I'm the consequence of your choices, I said. And as for Sophia, don't worry. She won't leave you. Not yet. I've made sure the Morettis know that she's your only remaining asset. They'll be coming to collect on your debt soon, and since you have no money, I wonder what they'll take instead. You're a monster, he gasped. No, Marcus, I said, turning away. A monster would have killed you in that church. I'm something much worse. I'm the woman who's going to let you live just so you can watch me succeed. I walked away, leaving him trembling in the grass. I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected. I didn't feel joy. I felt a cold, clean vacuum where my heart used to be. 2 nights later, I stood before the Lycan Council. They met in an underground chamber beneath an old library, a space that felt older than the city itself. 12 alphas sat in a semicircle, their eyes varying shades of amber and brown, their auras clashing like tectonic plates. Damien stood by my side, his presence a silent challenge to anyone who dared speak. A Silver Lunar? The eldest alpha, a man named Silas with white hair and a face like carved granite, scoffed. The line was broken during the Great Purge. You bring a human girl in a fancy suit and tell us she is our lost queen? This is a play for more power, Damien. She is not a play, Damien said, his voice low and dangerous. She is the blood. Then let her prove it, Silas said, standing up. He was massive, his muscles bulging beneath his wool coat. If she is the Silver Lunar, let her endure the cry of the ancestors. I felt a ripple of unease through the room. The cry was a psychic assault, a collective roar from the Council's alphas designed to crush the mind of anyone who wasn't strong enough to lead. No, Damien began, his hand tightening on my arm. She's only just shifted. I'll do it, I said, stepping forward. Damien looked at me, his eyes full of concern. Silver, it's too much. Your nervous system isn't ready. I've spent 7 years being crushed by a man who was nothing, I said, looking Damien in the eye. I can handle 12 alphas. I stepped into the center of the circle. I closed my eyes and reached deep inside, past the pain, past the betrayal, to that core of silver mercury. Begin, I said. The sound wasn't heard with the ears. It was felt in the soul. It was a psychic tidal wave of rage, dominance, and ancient memory. It felt like my brain was being shredded by 1,000 claws. My knees buckled, and I felt the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. "Give up," the voices whispered in my head. "You're just a girl. You're weak. You're the shadow Marcus said you were." I screamed, but inside my mind, I didn't scream as a human. I screamed as the wolf. I channeled the betrayal, the sight of Sophia at the altar, the cold rain in the industrial district. I took all that darkness and turned it into a silver shield. The mercury in my blood didn't just hum, it sang. Suddenly, the pressure snapped. I didn't just endure the cry, I threw it back. A shockwave of silver light erupted from me, knocking the alphas back in their stone chairs. The torches in the room flickered and died, leaving us in a world of molten gold and silver. I stood in the center, my hair glowing like a halo of starlight, my eyes burning with a radiance that made Silas shield his face. "I am Silver," I said, my voice echoing with the weight of 1,000 years. "I am the lunar you thought you lost, and I am not here to ask for your recognition. I am here to tell you that the hunt has begun." The silence was absolute. One by one, the alphas dropped their heads, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement. Even Silas bowed. "The Queen has returned," he whispered. As we walked out of the library and into the cool night air, Damien was silent. He led me to the car, but before we got in, he turned and pinned me against the door. His kiss wasn't like Marcus's. It wasn't a marking of territory. It was a collision. It was the taste of lightning and the scent of the forest. "You did it," he breathed against my lips. "You've unified the houses. They'll follow you into hell now." "Good," I said, my heart racing, "because that's exactly where we're going." My phone, the new encrypted one Damien had given me, buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from an unknown number. "I have Sophia. If you want her to live, bring the Thorn documents to the docks at midnight. Moretti." I looked at the screen and then at Damien. "What is it?" he asked. "The Morettis think they have a hostage," I said, a dark smile spreading across my face. "They think I still care about the woman who stole my life." "What are you going to do?" I looked toward the waterfront, where the shadow docks stood waiting for their new owner. "I'm going to go to the docks," I said, "but not to save her. I'm going to show them what happens when you try to use a human to bargain with a wolf." I got into the car, the silver in my blood cooling into a sharp, lethal edge. The story wasn't about a second chance at love anymore. It was about the total annihilation of anyone who thought I was still the girl in the third pew. The shadow docks looked like a graveyard of industry under the bruised purple of the midnight sky. Giant shipping cranes loomed over the water like rusted executioners, and the smell of salt and diesel hung heavy in the air. I arrived alone. Damien had wanted to bring a battalion of Lycan enforcers, but I had refused. This wasn't a military operation. This was an exorcism. I needed the Morettis, Sophia, and the city itself to see that I was no longer a piece on someone else's board. I was the hand that moved the players. As I stepped out of the black sedan, the wind whipped my silver-white hair across my face. I was dressed in tactical leather, black, sleek, and silent. In my hand, I carried a simple manila folder. It didn't contain the Thorn documents. It contained the deeds to every property the Moretti family thought they owned. I had spent the last 6 hours with Damien's hackers, dismantling their shell companies before I even left the tower. "Come out, Moretti," I called, my voice carrying over the lapping of the waves. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. The predatory resonance in my throat made the sound travel like a physical weight. A series of floodlights snapped on, blindingly bright, illuminating the center of Pier 14. Vincenzo Moretti, a man whose family had bled this city dry for 40 years, stood in the center of the light. He looked exactly like what he was, a relic of a dying world. Beside him, tied to a rusted bollard, was Sophia. She was a mess. Her pink gala dress was torn and stained with grease. Her makeup was smeared with tears, and her eyes were wide with a terror that went beyond anything she had ever experienced. When she saw me, a strangled sob escaped her throat. "Christy, please," she screamed. "They're gonna kill me. Tell them. Give them what they want." I walked into the circle of light, my footsteps echoing with a steady, terrifying rhythm. I didn't look at her. I looked at Vincenzo. "You're late, girl," Vincenzo growled, gesturing to the 3 snipers I knew were positioned on the cranes above us. My ears had already mapped their heartbeats. "And you're empty-handed. Where are the documents?" The documents don't exist, Vincenzo, I said, stopping 10 feet from him. And neither does your leverage. Do you really think I'm here to save the woman who helped destroy my life? Vincenzo's eyes narrowed. He looked at Sofia, then back at me. She was your best friend, your sister. I know your type, Christy. You're the good girl. You're the one who sacrifices. That's why Marcus chose you to be his floor mat. The good girl died, I said, and as I spoke, I let the silver mercury in my blood surge. The air around me began to shimmer. The temperature dropped so fast that the moisture in the air turned to frost on the crates. I didn't shift, not yet. But the aura I projected was so dense that Vincenzo actually took a step back, his hand shaking as he reached for his pistol. I'm not here for her, I continued, my voice vibrating with the power of the Silver Lunar. I'm here to tell you that as of 10 minutes ago, the Moretti family is bankrupt. Your warehouses are being seized. Your bank accounts in the Caymans have been emptied and donated to the shelters you've been creating for years. You have nothing left but the clothes you're wearing and the air in your lungs. You're lying, Vincenzo roared. He pulled his gun and aimed it at my head. Kill her. All of them. Now, the snipers fired. I didn't dodge. I didn't need to. In a blur of silver light, I shifted midair. I didn't become a wolf. I became something more primal, a hybrid form of grace and destruction. I moved faster than the human eye could track. The bullets whizzed through the space where I had been a millisecond before. I leaped. I wasn't a woman anymore. I was a force of nature. I scaled the side of the crane in 3 vertical bounds, my claws screaming against the metal. The first sniper didn't even have time to scream before I swept him off his perch. I didn't kill him. I dropped him into the freezing harbor. The second and third followed in a heartbeat. I landed back in the circle of light, standing between Vincenzo and Sofia. I was human again, but my eyes remained molten gold, and my skin pulsed with a faint, silvery luminescence. Vincenzo dropped his gun. He fell to his knees, his face pale. He was a man who understood power, and he finally realized he was standing in the presence of something ancient. Please, he whispered. I didn't even look at him. I turned to Sofia. I walked over and knelt beside her. I reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. She flinched, her teeth chattering so hard I thought they might break. Christy, I'm sorry, she sobbed. I was jealous. You were always so perfect, so kind, and everyone loved you. I wanted what you had. I thought if I took Marcus, I could be you. You could never be me, Sofia, I said softly. Because you think power is something you take from others. Real power is something you find when everything else is stripped away. I reached for the ropes binding her. With a flick of my wrist, my claw emerged and sliced through the thick hemp as if it were silk. Go, I said. Sofia blinked, stunned. What? Run. Take Vincenzo's car. Go back to Marcus. Tell him what you saw tonight. Tell him that the woman he betrayed is the reason he still has his life. You're letting us go. Death is a mercy, Sofia. And I'm not feeling merciful. I want you to live in the world I've created. I want you to walk through this city and know that every shadow you see, every rustle of the wind, is me watching. I want you to look at Marcus every morning and see the man who cost you everything. Sofia didn't wait. She scrambled to her feet and ran toward the idling SUV, leaving Vincenzo shivering on the concrete. I turned back to the old mobster. As for you, Vincenzo, I said, Damien's men are waiting at the edge of the docks. They'll take you to a place where you can spend the rest of your days reflecting on the empire you lost to a good girl. I walked to the edge of the pier and looked out at the horizon. The first hint of dawn was breaking, a thin line of gold and gray over the ocean. A heavy coat was draped over my shoulders. I didn't need to turn to know it was Damien. He stood beside me, his presence a silent anchor in the swirling storm of my new life. It's over, he said. No, I replied, leaning my head against his shoulder. It's just beginning. The Morettis are gone, the council is unified, and Marcus and Sofia are exactly where they belong, in the wreckage of their own choices. And you, Silver? Damien asked, turning me to face him. Are you where you belong? I looked at him, the man who had seen the wolf inside me before I even knew she existed. The man who didn't want a shadow, but a queen. For the first time in my life, I said, I'm not waiting for someone to give me a future. I'm building one. I looked back at the city. The lights of the obsidian tower were reflecting off the water. My docks, my city, my pack. I thought about the woman who had stood in that church 3 days ago. I felt a flicker of sadness for her, for the years she'd wasted trying to shrink herself to fit into Marcus's small world. But that sadness was gone in a heartbeat, replaced by a fierce, burning pride. I wasn't the victim of a betrayal. I was the survivor of a transformation. "Let's go home, Damien," I said. "Your wish is my command, my queen," he whispered, a flash of blue fire in his eyes. As we walked back to the car, the sun finally broke over the horizon, bathing the world in a brilliant, blinding silver. The shadows were gone. The night was over. But as the wind picked up, carrying the scent of the forest and the promise of a new era, I knew one thing for certain: the world would never be quiet again. Because the Silver Lunar had returned, and she was no longer afraid of the dark. 6 months later, I sat in the office at the top of the obsidian tower. On my desk was a tabloid newspaper. The headline read, "Marcus Vance declares bankruptcy, former golden boy filing for divorce amidst scandal." There was a grainy photo of him and Sophia arguing outside a courthouse. They looked old. They looked tired. They looked like strangers to each other. I closed the paper and looked out at the shadow docks. They were thriving. The new medical clinics and community centers I'd funded were open, and the people of the industrial district finally had a reason to look up. The door opened, and Damien walked in, carrying 2 glasses of dark wine. "Busy?" he asked, a smirk playing on his lips. "Just closing the books on the past," I said, standing up and walking toward the window. He handed me a glass and stood behind me, his arms wrapping around my waist. We stood there together, 2 alphas looking out over a city that was finally at peace. "Any regrets?" he whispered. I thought about the black dress, the jasmine-scented air of the cathedral, and the crushing weight of a heart that had been given everything and received nothing. I thought about the pain of the transformation and the blood on the marble floor. I felt the wolf stir inside me, a warm, contented hum of power. I leaned back against Damien, the mercury in my blood singing in harmony with his. "Not a single one," I said. The moon began to rise over the city, full, silver, and magnificent. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was watching it from below. I felt like I was part of it. I was Christy Evans, I was Silver, and I was exactly where I was meant to be.